what in this life necessarily involves a God?
The claim that you just made that logic doesn't evolve is itself problematic. Or excuse me, you said that logic evolved. Excuse me. I'm saying that is a problem because logic doesn't evolve. There's no evidence that it evolved, and in fact, it's the kind of thing that's immaterial and invariant that is not like flux matter.
But you're trying to bring it on the ground of evidence. I'm talking to you about the transcendental argument you're making, and for it to be true, it needs to be necessary that God exists. Do you agree with this statement?
Yes, and I'm saying that
So you're saying you cannot picture of a creature in this world that's capable of logical processing without God existing? I cannot.
Yes, because it makes no sense to say logic is just merely an evolutionary product, because by definition, what logic is, I think that most people agree that it's an invariant abstract process or series of laws or principles, and you don't get immaterial invariant principles from flux matter.
So you could not get a bunch of matter together that would process information mathematically, such as make additions or subtraction or divisions. You think you cannot have this without God being there?
Right, because the laws of logic are not material.
Well, they can be implemented in a material device.
But the laws themselves
a device can perform. A device can perform logical processing.
Right, but the laws themselves are not material.
Yeah, but that doesn't matter. If you want to imagine
the heart of the question.
Existing independently, the computer, it processes logical information and it exists in the physical world. There's nothing that penetrates the computer from outside. When it does a calculation, it works on its own. And if the computer had not been created by a human and was to exist somewhere in the universe out of random, you would recognize that there is such a thing as an arrangement of matter that can perform logical processing.
No, I'm saying that itself proves that laws are not material, because if they were, they could evolve into the opposite of themselves, and they don't. So if you believe that laws are material and they're part of the evolutionary process, then you must also believe that the evolutionary process is something that can evolve into the opposite of itself, which is self-refuting.
I don't believe that laws are material. I believe that laws are principles that we can hold in our brain and that we can judge a computer by this law and say whether the computer respects a certain form of logic or another. But you're recognizing that a machine could perform the operations that would satisfy a logical evaluator that would look at it and say, yes, that is true, and that this machine could exist in the physical world independent of any God.
No, I'm saying that it makes no sense to arbitrarily do special pleading, which is a fallacy, to say that I'm not going to accept a meta level question about what a law of logic is. I'm just going to use laws of logic in the world, and I don't want to deal with the question of whether they have any kind of independent existence. And I'm saying that I can prove that they have an independent existence by the fact of the absurdity of saying that they are part of an evolutionary process.
So that's a smokescreen. You are refusing to engage with the question of whether a machine can exist independent of your God, when in fact your argument relies on the very necessity of your God for these logical processes to be made.
Can a machine exist independent of God, is your question?
Yep. A machine that would process 2 + 2 = 4 and 4 + 4 = 8.
I mean, it's a nonsense question, because you're asking me to deny my worldview to say, could there be a machine that does these processes?
But CJ, I'm just like you, and just like you don't care what I think earlier, you said, I don't care what can come out of your brain. I care about the truth. I don't care about whether you can picture it or not. I'm asking you to be honest with yourself once in this debate and think about this machine. Does it exist or not? Can it exist or not?
Right. My point earlier was not to question your intellectual honesty in a moral sense. I was trying to point out what I saw as a contradiction. So I'm not trying to avoid the question. I'm simply saying that I don't think the question makes sense. If I believe that God exists, then it's impossible for me to conceive of a world where there's atheistic computers that just do math functions. Like there's the atheist Texas Instruments world where the I mean,
so you just acknowledged that you cannot conceive of it, and you don't want to conceive of it because you know very well that if a computer was out there out of the random arrangement of matter and was to perform calculations that if a human was to look at would judge are logical, it would prove that something can exist that processes logic without God. And you know that your argument
That's
relies
interesting
on
because
this
this is
machine
no.
not existing.
This is probably the most bizarre non-empirical atheist argument I've ever heard. So because I don't, I mean, you have no evidence or proof of this kind of thing or this kind of world where
No,
there's
but
a
because your argument does not rely on evidence, your argument of transcendentality relies on the fact that it's impossible for machines to
you're
exist that would.
you're wrong about that not being an evidence. It is an evidence. It's a logical argument, just like Gödel's arguments are logical arguments.
That's
The
not what
form
I
it's a
said.
logical form.
That's not what I said. What I'm saying is your argument of transcendentality requires that God is necessary
Right.
for people to exist in the state that they are, and you
And to
claim
have
that the state
cognition. Right?
and you state that the state that they are, which justifies this necessity, is the fact that they can process logic. And you refuse right now to engage with the theoretical machine example because you know very well that the minute you answer yes to my question, your entire transcendental argument falls. Jay, can you picture a fictive machine that would process logic and give the right answers, even if it doesn't know anything about the laws of logic?
No, I mean, this is a laughable argument. I understand that you're trying to sort of turn the transcendental argument around, but I'm saying that it's a misunderstanding of what the transcendental argument is because just because you seem to think that throughout the debate, because we can conceive of something that in some way that means that it's possible or exists. And there are all kinds of things that we can conceive of that are not possible and don't exist. So I literally don't understand what the argument is trying to say. It's not I'm not trying to avoid something.
Okay. I'm trying to dismantle your assumption that because you observe people processing logic, then God exists. God necessarily exists. That's your argument. Let's
That's not
not
the
add.
argument. The argument
What
is
is.
not because I observe people processing logic. The argument is that
Okay.
there are all kinds of things about not just logic, but also mathematics and other transcendental categories that
Okay. I'm
cannot be
going to
empirically
undo them one
verified.
by one. I'm going to do them one by one, but we
Okay.
start with logic. You claim that logic is part of the set of things that justifies the existence of God as a
Sure.
necessity.
Right.
And now
Because
I'm asking you, can you picture a computer that has the right responses to logical processing, but that exists in a universe where there's no God?
no,
Why?
because it's incoherent and contradictory.
What's incoherent and contradictory in the fact that
Number
these
one, there's no
atoms are
evidence for
arranged?
this thing. There's no evidence
No,
for this
you're back
universe.
to the evidence. I didn't ask if this computer actually existed. I ask in
So you want me
principle
to
if it can
theoretically
exist.
believe in things for which you have no evidence?
Absolutely.
How is
Because
this?
we are not talking about the real world. We're talking about your transcendental argument, which is a denial
You
of
don't
that very
understand the transcendental argument.
possibility.
It applies to the real world.
The transcendental argument is a denial that it's even possible that there would be machines that would process logic, that logic could be performed by a machine or a computer. You admitted that earlier. You said, I admit that it is a necessary condition that God exists for any sort of logical operations to be made.
To be possible, not to be made, to be possible.
Okay, so there can be machines
That's
that
what a precondition
make.
is.
So there can be machines that perform logical operations that are in line with the laws of
Okay,
logic.
the reason this doesn't work is because every reference that you have as an individual to machines or to logic or to anything like that you're using in this example, they come from this world. And they're necessarily conditioned by their existence in this world.
I'm using the word machine to communicate it to you, but can you picture atoms existing without any humans knowing about the term atom?
Can I picture atoms existing without humans knowing of the existence of atoms?
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
Okay, so I'm asking you to make the same thing about the machine. Forget that I'm calling it a machine. Forget that we have a concept of it. Can you agree that there are arrangements of matter that can output stuff that is logically true while it isn't guided by God?
No.
So you're denying that a computer could exist in a physical universe
Right.
without being guided by God. Can
Well,
you
without
explain
there
to
being
me
a worldview in which it's possible to make computers and have logic and so forth. I mean, where's this computer coming from? I
this
mean,
computer could be arranged by a bunch of flesh
I mean, this
processing
isn't this interesting.
creatures?
This is what the atheist has to fall back on. Is this most absurd, a hypothetical, imagined worldview, and that's because really the whole position is absurd and imagined. I mean, I'm not. I'm arguing a very specific thing about
Jay,
transcendentals in this
the
world.
machine I'm talking to you about are human beings. It's not an absurd world. The world I'm talking about
That's a
is real
paradigm
world.
assumption that you think humans are merely biological machines.
Yep. Do you have evidence that
But
I'm
you
made
believe
of
that you wrote
anything
your
else
book.
than an atom, than a set of molecules?
This
Do
is
you have
ridiculous. You
evidence?
believe you wrote your book. So your book was the work of JF and JF's mind, right? It wasn't the process of a determined machine, right?
It was the process of a determined machine. It was the
So
process of
you
the
didn't have
neurons
your
in my
ideas.
mind.
You
What?
didn't have, and you're not making your own arguments right now. They're just a chemical determined process.
Absolutely.
So you're not making arguments. Thank you. I've won the debate.
All right. Bye.
No,
Wait,
I'm saying that if you
you
believe
serious?
No, but I told you at the beginning, I'm just a monkey-like creature with a mouth and a brain, with a quanta loop to eat it and other human beings to
that's
exchange with.
self-refuting.
I didn't
That's the
claim anything
transcendental
else.
argument.
And your problem is that you cannot debunk this version of
I just
my life.
debunked it.
You cannot prove that it's impossible.
I just debunked it by the fact that you come to the debate and you make arguments acting like they're from your mind and you freely do it. And you just said that you are a determined machine.
So
That's
this is a
self-contradictory.
okay.
Have
This
you?
is a class. Andy,
Jay,
this is important.
That's
I'm
called
not
the
into your
determined
low
knowledge.
IQ interventions, Andy. So you shut the fuck up for 1 minute.
okay, fine, fuck, man.
So
All right.
this is a classical argument of the form of Stefan Molyneux, which is you engage in discussion, therefore you accept all the rules of discussion. I didn't. I don't. I'm just a human being. I emit noise. There are other beings. They interpret this noise based on their own rules. Andy, you can go ahead.
Why do you have to be a dick like that? I was gonna ask one question that was part of this.
I was kidding, Andy.
No, that pissed me off, dude.
I'm sorry, Andy. I was kidding.
Just because you're triggered, you can't fucking just go.
Hey,
I was not actually triggered. I love you, Andy.
Can I
was
reply?
kidding.
Okay, I want to ask one thing. I think what I want to clarify when JF, what he's saying is like, have you proved that he could not exist without God? Meaning him being a monkey eating a cantaloupe, right? Can he not just exist like that without there being a God? Have you proved that there is a God for JF to be sitting there eating a cantaloupe?
So the argument is that is self-refuting and contradictory as a position. And no, my argument has nothing to do with Stefan Molyneux. I don't follow Stefan Molyneux, so I don't even know what his kind of.
So you don't know that it does have to do with it.
With Molyneux?
Yeah, it's the same form of argument. Molyneux proves moral realism using that strategy. He says, well, as soon as you engage in discussion, you want to share some things that are meaningful, therefore meaning exists, therefore blah, 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 and he moves on to moral realism. The fact that I engage in this discussion does not commit me to any structure in your mind. I don't care. I'm not bound by your rules and your interpretation of what this discussion is.
You're bound by objective rules of logic and debate. If you're not bound by objective rules of logic, then there's no debate.
Why can't me just sitting here, I was born and I exist, why can't I just be doing this without God? Like, are you saying God
because on the one hand, you guys want libertarian freedom in your socio-political sphere, and on the other hand, you're saying that you're a determined machine. So JF, your book is not your book. It's just a random process of determined chemicals. It's not. Right. You don't deserve any credit for that. And I'm saying listen, on my view, you do deserve credit for that because you have the ability to reason. You have a soul. You have a self. You have a will. There is freedom.
So let's move to this subject because you mentioned it in the introduction, and it's true that we've skipped it totally. This idea that I had it noted here. You say you're saying that, can you repeat what you just said? It is that the fact that I exist and that I write books.
This is sometimes called the naturalist fallacy or the determinist fallacy. And it's the idea that on the one hand, a lot of times the naturalist wants to have a kind of biologicized mechanistic view of the world, but they also want to have the other extreme irrational contradiction of total libertarian freedom. And these two views are totally incommensurable. They don't mix. And that's what I'm saying is a contradiction.
Okay.
You want both of those things. So your book
So
is
the fact that I engage on the public space as a libertarian would prove that I believe in morals, in objective morals.
No. It presupposes that you believe in metaphysical concepts like freedom, or that you are a self that deserves credit for your work.
No, I don't believe in metaphysical concepts like freedom. When I argue on the public space, I use words freedom. I descend from monkeys who didn't want to have other monkeys control their testicles. And in human societies, we've evolved to develop language. We're able to understand concepts that other people are talking about. We're able to agree on a common concept. The concept of freedom is not a universal concept. It is simply the fact that we consider that our actions in the world can be interfered by others or not. There's no statement that...
I don't think that's coherent. That's my argument. I understand what you're saying.
Well, let me complete my argument, because I want to show you how this is not incoherent.
Okay.
So there are other machines around me that could stop my arm movement as I make an arm movement. When I say I am for freedom, I'm not saying everyone should be for freedom. I'm not saying it's a desirable state for every possible creature and it's an objective truth. All I'm saying is I'm trying to convince the monkeys around me not to block my arm movements, because I know that they have genetic interests that are different from mine. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, it's understandable that I've evolved to send that kind of signals. I'm just telling to the other, don't invade on my liberties because I want to reproduce. If I didn't do that, what probably happened is that there were people not discussing stuff in human societies, not able to interact through language, or not able to tell others to shut up when it's time to shut up. These people were outbreeded. And so today what we have is people who care about what others will do and who care to protect themselves from the actions of others. There's no inconsistency in what I've just stated.
I'm sure, of course there is.
I just want to say one thing. Thank you to Prax Girl for the huge donation, $100. And she wrote, "Oh, JF, totally wrecked."
I'm not wrecked because that $100 is coming in my pocket, lady. No, but yeah, what is inconsistent in the picture I've just made?
So I think that's a great example of what I've seen consistently through the debate is the I don't want there to be anything metaphysical. And this is why in the history of Western thought, in the history of Enlightenment thought, and then into the atheistic philosophers and so forth, Hume and Kant, the reason that they started going away from metaphysics is because they're problematic. It's difficult to talk about rights, to talk about the notion of freedom, and on the one hand say, I don't want anything metaphysically related to that, but I also want this to be something that I really possess. I don't want to have any metaphysical conception of what a self is or what my mind is and its work and its products, and that I should receive the money for the book that I write. But at the same time, I also hold on my worldview that I don't believe in any metaphysical principles or truths, no absolutes, no universals, and maybe freedom is not for everybody else, but I'm also just a biological machine. So in other words, just because you want to say, I don't care about anybody else's universal relations to these principles, I just want these for myself. Again, it's just like earlier in the debate about epistemology. When you study logic and epistemology, it's not about what you want or don't want or accept or don't accept, because these are principles that are objective. And you said, I don't accept the logical rules and principles that you bring to the debate. I mean, if that's the case, then there is no debate. I mean, I'm not being mean to you. I'm saying that that I don't see how we could engage in a debate if
No,
there's
and we can
not.
see this. This is exactly where Molyneux reaches. This is exactly the form of his argument, where he doesn't want to engage with a moral nihilist because he knows very well that the existence of a single moral nihilist in this world is sufficient to prove that there's no universal truth about morality. I
Okay,
think
but
that you're doing
JF,
the same thing here.
if you say there's no universal truth about morality, that's a universal claim.
It's a universal claim, but
Yeah.
it's not a universal moral claim. I'm not saying there is a way we
Actually,
should
it is.
act. No, it's a
No.
statement of fact
Anytime
about
you make
possibilities.
if you make a truth claim, and by the way, earlier you said there are no universal truth claims. Now you said there is. If you make
It is a universal truth claim within a local physical system, which is my brain.
that makes no sense. A
Yeah,
local
it's the
universe.
truth. If you kill all human beings tomorrow, this truth does not exist anymore.
I don't think you know what a universal claim is or what these ideas are in epistemology. They're not even.
Well, you keep saying that throughout the debate. I don't think you know. I don't think you read. I don't think you did that. If you had any argument to convince me that there is one thing that's wrong in my vision of the world, you would state it. You wouldn't send me to your
20
books.
times that you keep making universal claims and saying they're not universal, but they're universal. That's
I
a contradiction.
say a single universal claim in that discussion.
You just did right now. You just said there are no universal truths, and that's universally. You just said it was.
No. These are not universal in the way you mean it. They are universal in the sense that they cover everything that we could agree on that we're talking about in this discussion. But there can be another JF on another planet thinking differently, and there would be no objective way by which he's wrong and I'm right, or I'm wrong and he's right. The moral truth would need to be determined by a behavior being objectively better, objectively true.
So
there's no such standard because people can have their axis of value among many spaces, which can lead to disagreement and legitimate disagreements.
When you say there's
that
no
cannot
such
be
standard, no such standard is a universal claim.
There's no such standard that you've been giving me in that conversation.
I just gave it to you. You just said there's no such standard. You're relying on a universal.
I changed my sentence. There is no such standard that you can provide me that would be objectively true.
Well, on your view, you just said that that's objectively true.
This is not a moral truth.